Take two. Not excited for what that might mean. All right. Um, let me get Ange as a co-host. We're gonna rock and roll in a minute. Um, Fingers crossed that it gets less weird as we go. Admits.
I'll take care of the admissions.
Okay, great. Then I'm gonna start. Um, Welcome, everybody. I'm glad you made it. A minute ago on a different meeting, I told everybody how to change their name. I don't know why you're all Stephanie. It's very strange.
Stephanie should run the
Uh,
meeting.
No, thank you.
all right, so here we are. Welcome to this heart rate variability introduction webinar. Briefly, my name is Jenna Prada. I had renamed myself in the previous meeting. I'll do it now again. Um, I am the Director of Education at Sadar Psychological and a former public school teacher and administrator, also a special educator. So that's the lens I bring to this. I'm going to be doing most of the talking, but Angelica Sadar, do you want to introduce yourself? She will also be chiming in.
Hi there. I'm a psychologist. I am the of the clinical director at Sadar Psychological and Sports Center, along with my husband Mitch. I don't know if he's going to be in the meeting or not, but we've been running a neurofeedback clinic and doing heart rate variability for over 25 years now, and we are happy to have you here.
All right, amazing. So this is going to be about an hour long with 15 or so of those minutes being a Q&A. So we're really going to rock and roll. This is a fast introduction, and it's going to feel like we throw a lot at you without diving deep. And you'll be right if that's how you feel. So more extensive courses certainly are available, but our goal today is to kind of whet your palate for heart rate variability, as it were. I think that why you're here is because most of your clients, your students, or your children, again, depending what angle you're here from, struggle with stress, anxiety, and or emotional regulation. We know that based on statistics, 1 in 3 of them are dealing with clinical anxiety, and you likely only have talk-based tools or other tools that aren't quite making the impact you would hope. And so you're here to see about what HRV can do. So the question I want to ask is, what if you could accelerate those people's learning or their progress in therapy? If you could show them real-time evidence of their nervous system actually calming and thereby empower them to regulate their own physiology and give them a skill that they can practice independently. That's, in theory, and in practice, what you can do with heart rate variability. So what we're going to hopefully show you over the course of the next 40 minutes of me talking um, is that there's an abundance of research for heart rate variability, right? Number one, this is not a niche modality. We're going to talk about that and this little bit of the science that backs it up. We're going to talk about the ways that giving people real-time feedback make physiological regulation a learnable skill. Look, and now there's a lot of me's. I know why that happened, though. That's my fault. And essentially, we want you to walk away understanding that this is an evidence-based modality that's super accessible to you, regardless of what your particular lens is, and that you can easily integrate it into everything you already do. And you'll just cut me off if there's ever anything you want to add, right?
Yep, good.
Okay, beautiful. So to help us target this as well as we can, I'd love to do just a quick poll. If people could drop in the chat which of these describes you most closely. And if you want to add a note about, why you're excited about heart rate variability or how you decided to
Hmm.
join us today, that would be super fun. So it looks like we've got a lot of clinicians. Um, so many clinicians. Oh, a parent. Um, okay, some of you are already practicing neurofeedback. Very cool. Um, Haha, it's funny to see my own name pop up. Super. So we'll make sure that as we talk, we have Ange chime in if I ever don't give enough examples for the clinicians. And there's a couple educators here. I'll hit that pretty well. Awesome. All right. Thanks all for giving us that information. Okay, here we go. So I started out saying that the research backing up heart rate variability as something that has a lot of impact on our physical emotional health is overwhelming. This top image is something I screen grabbed from typing heart rate variability into PubMed, and you can see that there's over 3,500 articles about HRV in just this year alone. For people that aren't familiar with PubMed, these are all rigorous articles, peer-reviewed articles, right? So there's a lot of information about this. Over the course of PubMed's history, over 66,000 articles. And so again, this really is a well-established modality. And if you have particular interests, you can obviously find a lot of research connecting HRV to whatever your interests are. HRV and education, HRV and cardiac health. Um, this is a biofeedback webinar, and so I just plugged that in. I didn't include the image, but there's 781 articles if you search HRV biofeedback, and 84 of them are from this year alone. All right. Oh, I'm gonna let in John. Hi, John. All right, and so obviously I can't do a deep dive into 66,000 articles, but I did pull a couple standout statistics. The citations for these are below if anyone wants to follow up. I'll share this PowerPoint in our follow-up email. Um, so HRV yields a large effect size for anxiety for people who aren't super familiar with statistical analysis. That 0.81 is telling us it's nearly a full standard deviation of effect in comparison to other treatments, right? And this one comes from a meta-analysis of 24 studies, right? And then when we look at PTSD treatment, dropouts in treatment were reduced by
Wow.
75% when HRV was added. And that one comes from a meta-analysis of 5 studies with military veterans. When HRV was added, attrition dropped down to a little below 6%, and that was compared to typical rates of 16 to 36%. So that's a pretty big deal. And for you clinicians, you can kind of extrapolate there and imagine that if you were adding HRV to the treatment you offer clients, they might be more likely to complete their treatment with you, and that would obviously be excellent. Um, oh, there's me again. 80% of
Okay, cool.
children with ADHD saw large improvements in their symptoms, particularly related to focus. When I say large, here we're talking about effect sizes that were over a standard deviation of improvement as compared to other treatments. And for adults with ADHD, it's actually 87%. So educators, when we're thinking about focus and the impact that that has both on behavior and on academic performance, this is a big deal.
And
And
I do
then,
want to, oh, go ahead, sorry.
don't hop in. I can keep
Yeah.
talking, but you can jump in too.
Okay. It's because you're saying educators, and there's, so glad to have educators in this meeting with us, but as well, for those of you that are clinicians, think about the impact this can have in your interactions with the schools. So there's just such great overlap here. that we're pretty excited about it. We've been doing some work with schools that has really reflected that. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Thank you for popping in. Um, and then this last statistic is really exciting because it speaks to the lasting effects of learning this skill that we're going to talk about. And so improvements to depression systems persisted a month essentially beyond the active training, right? So people did HRV training and then they stopped. And at a month-long follow-up, everything remained the same. All their improvements persisted. So that's also obviously excellent and the value of teaching people a real skill. So I'm trying to make the case here that HRV is very impactful, that the effects are large. And so I want to just talk about what types of presentations are impacted by that effect, right? And so each of the presentations listed here have research that establishes that HRV is clinically efficacious in terms of interventions for these presentations. Um, and I'm actually inclined to let you talk about each of these. I can
Sure.
certainly, yeah,
Yep.
great.
Yeah.
Off you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, I mean, I won't talk probably about all of them, but there is clear research that when your focus and attention is best, is when you're having good heart rate variability. And in fact, um,
John.
NFL teams use heart rate variability as a measurement of how they're going to train their players on any given day. And they don't NHL teams, as well as Navy SEALs, don't introduce any new information for learning when heart rate variability is
I'm not on
dysregulated.
camera or
Um,
I was listening to this.
Somebody please mute yourself. Thank you. As far as cardiac incidents, in cardiac patients, there is a lower rate of incidence of secondary and tertiary cardiac events when people are trained in heart rate variability. For the life of me, I don't understand why every cardiologist doesn't include this as part of their basic protocol. And basically what we'll get to is talking about how you regulate the autonomic nervous system, which that has meaning for many of you. And if it doesn't, don't worry about it. But it's like your whole nervous system, and it helps to regulate all of that. And when that's regulated, your emotions get regulated. So it's a no-brainer that this can have a big impact on anybody that you're working with. Take it away, Jay.
Amazing. Yeah, and I just am going to call out specifically because I think you hit on everything there except for chronic pain. Um, and so, with chronic pain, high HRV is connected to reduced inflammation, better immune response, higher pain tolerance, and then all that emotional regulation also means just lower experience of frustration with the chronic pain. So we're talking about kind of just improved quality of life when we add HRV to interventions for chronic pain. All right. And so then we want to talk a little bit about how HRV biofeedback training can be easily integrated into what each of you are doing. And again, you're the clinician, probably makes more sense for you to talk about that. I certainly.
Sure. Yeah. And, anymore, our patients have become quite educated themselves. They come in as Dr. Google and have learned a lot of things before they come to see us. And if you simply, no matter what you're working with or what the goals are, if you ask somebody about their physiology, they can tell you, yes, I sweat a lot, or yes, my heart pounds. They may even tell you, I feel nothing. And that's as relevant as feeling overwhelmed by your physiology. And this can just be integrated into whatever work you're doing very readily. And the really wonderful thing about it is it makes sense to our clients. They understand that their physiology is connected with their emotions.
All
And
right.
likewise with parents, if
Oh,
they, go ahead.
you go ahead. You go ahead. I was going to say I can talk about teachers and parents, I
Yep.
thought.
Yeah, I was going to skip. Okay. So, we have parents that bring their children in. We always teach the parents at the same time as we're teaching the kids that we're working with. And likewise, if an adult is coming in and they have children at home, we talk to them about this can be a whole family event, and a whole way of helping to regulate the family. And now teachers.
All right. Yeah. So, teachers, this is an awesome classroom self-regulation tool. And there's a number of ways that could take shape. If you are a special educator and you've got kids in a pull-out or a set situation, this is something that can very easily be done with individual kids or small groups. And then it can also happen in the classroom in terms of introducing slow-paced breathing, which is the heart rate variability breathing into transitions. I know a lot of teachers do breathing work, box breathing, calm breathing, mindful breathing throughout the day as part of transitions. But you can kind of shift how you're doing that so that it's backed up by a little bit more research and is going to more directly impact kids' physiology. I know a lot of teachers that have sort of sensory spaces or calming spaces in their classroom. That's a great place to incorporate heart rate variability.
Hello.
And also in terms of thinking about test anxiety, hard to speak, test anxiety reduction. Um, Kids should be doing some centering breathing prior to a high stakes test or prior to speaking in front of the classroom so that they go into that as regulated as possible. That's going to increase their focus as they do that work. And again, there's a lot of research to show that increasing HRV through HRV biofeedback training improves executive functioning, and if you're a teacher, you know that that has broad implications in terms of sort of just the feeling in your classroom and each individual's ability to engage. Um, and I'll talk a little bit more about parents. This has easy integration to lots of routines. Think about when your kids come home from school, transitioning from that super focused day into whatever's going to go on. Bedtime routines, if you've got kids that are kind of overactivated going into bedtime, we can use HRV to downshift a bit. Meltdown prevention is a real thing. And in fact, we'll talk about that in a case study in a moment. If we just regulate our physiology throughout the day or at regular intervals, that's going to have a generalizing effect all the time, right? If you think about, and for everybody going through a day, we sort of start at a baseline. If we have a stressor, and we're able to bring that down, great, we're back to baseline. But if we have a stressor and we don't bring it down, and then another stressor and we bring it down, the higher we climb, the closer we are to that meltdown, whether we're a kid or an adult. And then, of course, this is a skill that is lifelong. So if we're teaching it to our children, that's obviously a wonderful service for them as they go down, not to mention the impact on each of these settings. As anyone we're with has an increased ability to self-regulate, that's going to just reduce the stress in the home, in the classroom, in the clinical setting. Oh, didn't do what I wanted. All right. A little bit of super quick biology
Real
of
quick.
what's going on when we do heart rate variability training. This could be a master's level course, and we're going to do it in 2 minutes. Um, so it's not a deep dive, folks. The autonomic nervous system, many of you will know, but just in case, is the part of our nervous system that regulates all of the automatic functions, right? So think heartbeat, breathing, digestion, blood pressure, right? All the things that our bodies are doing to keep us going. And again, you can interrupt me at any point if you are so inclined. Um, that autonomic nervous system breaks into kind of two branches. The gas pedal, as it were, is the sympathetic nervous system, and that is our flight or fight. So when that's activated, we are activated. That's when we're stressed, we're sweating, our muscles are tense, and that pulls energy away from things like digestion. Our pupils might dilate, our heart might race, right? That's the gas. The brake is the parasympathetic system. And so all those things I just said are going to kind of reverse. This is our rest and repair
Mhm,
system,
mhm. And
right?
through evolution, we are really programmed to be in a sympathetic state. We're programmed to be ready for fight, flight, or freeze. And even throughout the day and throughout an hour and minutes, we see fluctuations in that system. So it wants to be activated. And I want to say that our current world does not do a lot to help us deactivate it.
Absolutely, right? And that kind of references that opening slide where it's the vast majority of the people that any of us are working with are stressed, anxious, emotionally dysregulated, because they're tipped, as it were, to the sympathetic state. And so we've got that, and then we've got this bottom image here. I think you all can see my little pointer.
Yep, you got it.
um, is of the vagus nerve. That's the red thing. It's big. That's a big nerve. It's powerful. This takes on a primary role in helping us regulate the balance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems. And it's tied intimately to our breath and to our heart rate variability, right? And what HRV biofeedback training does is allow us to train that vagus nerve to increase our vagal tone and to do a better job of balancing that gas and that brake, right? And of when we get activated, one, being a little bit less reactive, and two, having the skill to pull ourselves back down into the parasympathetic system. And do you want to say more about the vagus nerve in our
Yeah,
two
we
minute?
could. No, I think there's a lot you can go into that very deeply, but we want to just kind of give you an overview. It's complex and it's important, and it is very closely tied to our ability to manage our emotions and our physiology.
All right, so here we are. I've been saying heart rate variability, but I haven't bothered to define it up until now. And what we're looking at here when we say HRV is the beat to beat variation and how much time is between those beats, right? And so I think many of us are under the impression that our heart is a metronome, right? That it's an incredibly steady beat. And the reality is it's not. Every single beat, it's responding. And when I say it, that autonomic nervous system is responding to input from our bodies, right? We've got barrow sensors in our blood vessels that are noticing the blood pressure and sending information to our brains and adjusting based on that. We've got external stimuli that are, catching our attention, and now we're ready to be in fight or flight, or something happened and it caught our attention, right? So every single beat, we're fluctuating a little bit as our body is ready to respond to all of the input it's receiving from both inside and outside, right? And so what we know is that the higher our heart rate variability, that is, the more fluctuation beat to beat, the more flexible our physiology, right? If we're changing a lot from beat to beat, that means our body, our autonomic nervous system, is doing a lot to respond to those stimuli. And that is indicative of us generally being more resilient, right? Being able to recover and adjust more quickly. And that's what creates all of the benefits that we've referred to up until now. All right, and just nodding.
Okay. Good.
uh, I think a lot of people tend to want to ask the question of like, what's a good HRV? Um, we want to shy a little bit away from that. And when we think about HRV training, we want to think about HRV as something we compare one individual to themselves, right? So you want to kind of understand where their starting point is and see how they grow and what the impact is of training for them. That said, there are life events that will lower our HRV. Those things can be huge events like a cardiac event. Following that, HRV is going to be low. Athletes who have a really rigorous training day will see the next day that their HRV is a bit low, and that's one of the ways that they use heart rate variability to optimize their training. And we also know that HRV has variations tied to age and gender. So, if you need kind of that, what's a good average? For an average young adult, you're going to be looking at something between 35 and 60 milliseconds of variation. And I kind of bring that up only because so many of us have these consumer wearables where they're telling us what's going on. And that again just speaks to how what how much research there is behind this and how reliable HRV is as an indicator of our stress and of our health.
Yeah,
Okay.
because it is so individualized, very often I'll have folks come in and say, "Oh, I do breathing. Oh, I know about the 6 in, 7 out, or whatever. I'm a yoga teacher and I know how to do it." And we may measure their heart rate variability and be like, "You're on the right track, but would you like to improve it?" There are, anybody can improve it. And when we get into the training, we always start out having somebody be successful, and encourage them to go on. But then we want to stress them and make it harder. And people do get challenged no matter how good they think they are at it.
Yeah, good point. All right. And so I think, we're kind of dovetailing nicely into what Anne's just talked about. There is the inclination to say, oh, heart rate variability biofeedback is just learning to relax. And that's not the case, right? I think a lot of people have the
Right.
impression that they're good at relaxing. This is learning to manage your nervous system. So this image shows it really nicely. Credit to Dr. Saul Rosenthal, who has this image. Um, so what we see here is the blue line is respiration, it's the breathing rate, and the orange line is the heart rate, right? So we can see the changing heart rate variability. And at the beginning, this person is breathing quickly, hyperventilating, and we can see kind of there's not much relationship between the breath and the heart rate. And the heart rate's actually not terribly variable. And then as they slow down and regulate that rate, there's this nice thing that we refer to as coherence, where the heart rate and the breath rate sync up. And that's how we maximize the heart rate variability. And you can see the further in we go, you're getting nice peaks and valleys as the heart rate adjusts with the breathing rate. And that's why it is so individual. There's a range that kind of is where most people will fall with their ideal breath rate for heart rate variability training. But you really need to identify your own, that's called a resonance frequency, that breath rate that maximizes your HRV in order to get the maximum benefit. And that's where the biofeedback is also going to come in, because what we'll see on the screen, the client, the student, the child, is to what extent is their physiology all syncing up? And that feedback might be, depending on the software you're looking at, just the data itself. Wow, you can really see it here in this image, or a beautiful image, or colors. There's a lot of variability in what the feedback is, but getting that feedback and learning to say, oh, wow, when I breathe at this rate and from my diaphragm and all the rest, I can really see what's going on and I can learn to replicate that in my daily life. That's where the power of the biofeedback training is. All right. So, what to expect? Um, Most people can learn the skill that I was just talking about, the syncing up of their breath with their own personal physiology in about 3 or 4 sessions. So they're going to need your guidance at the beginning to recognize that. They're going to need you to help cue them, right? There's a type of breathing that's going to be the most helpful, but 3 to 4 sessions, and probably they've got it. And then most folks will then see noticeable benefits in under a month. There's an asterisk there because they have to practice in order to see the benefit, right? So if all they do is show up at those 3 or 4 sessions and learn the skill, but then never use it, no benefit. Um, oh, didn't advance. And so this next slide makes the point that perfect practice makes perfect. You don't want to send people off to practice until you know that they've learned the skill. Because if you're practicing and you're not practicing right, I don't love that word, but we all know what I mean, they're not going to see the benefit that they'd be looking for. And they'll come back frustrated. I'm doing the breathing all the time and I'm not less stressed. Um, so, how much practice is necessary? Most of those clinical studies, if not all that we looked at earlier, are having people do 20 minutes of HRV breathing 2 times a day. Neither you nor I know anyone who's going to do that. That is a tall order. It's just not going to happen. So, what are realistic expectations that can lead to change? And that's going to honestly vary person to person. You are much better off having someone commit to and execute 3 minutes a day of regular practice than trying to demand 10 minutes and having them never do it. The key here, as with learning anything, is setting goals that are attainable and that people can feel successful on. And so we talk about a thing called habit stacking, which is the idea of let's kind of connect this HRV breathing to other routines that exist in the day, right? To something visual we're going to see or a part of the day where we're going to experience it and we're going to remember to do it. So, a couple ideas on that front. I know people who do their HRV breathing at traffic lights, right? And so it's a couple breaths every however often they hit a traffic light. And they get to wherever they're going nice and centered. Most of us, including children, are pretty good at brushing their teeth twice a day. So if you can add 2 or 3 minutes of HRV breathing to every time you brush your teeth, that's going to be a lovely thing. And then this test image is the idea of connecting your HRV breathing to the goals that brought you to whoever you're working with, right? So for a student, it might be, hey, if I know I've got a test coming up, I want to take some time and regulate myself ahead of that test. For a client, it might be I've got a stressful family interaction coming up. I'm going to regulate myself ahead of that. Or a job interview. For your children in your house, you might know sort of the points in the day that tend to be challenging. And so you might look at ways to create routines and bring in the HRV breathing at that point. And I see you taking notes. Do you want to add
Yeah,
something?
I'm addressing questions.
Oh, all right. Wonderful.
One of the many Stephanies is asking questions.
Too funny. We're gonna have no idea who came. Um, all right. So
I
that
do. So interrupt. If you can change your name, that would be helpful. The real Stephanie. Thank you.
uh, all right. So training progression, right? This is sort of going to be the phases that anyone who does HRV training is going to go through. You're going to start off, and there's a little bit of education that's necessary, right? You have to explain to whoever you're working with what are they doing. A lot of the information we just use now might be part of that. There's going to be a bit of assessment. Where's their starting place for this HRV training? And that's important because knowing where they start allows you to point to their growth over time, and that's an empowering thing. You'll find their resonance frequency, that's that ideal breath pace for their maximum HRV. And you're going to teach them diaphragmatic breathing because when we breathe from our diaphragm, as opposed to from our chest up here, up high, we're going to have a greater impact. That's the skill. They have to learn the skill at a baseline, and then they're going to develop proficiency in that. And by that, I mean they're going to get to a place where they can achieve coherence consistently. And that might require a bunch of cueing from you or whatever it may be. And at that point, then they can move to independent practice and start to generalize that skill, right? So they're going to get to a point where they can recognize that they're in a coherent space without the feedback on the screen or auditory. And they're going to begin to start to use HRV strategically in their life to achieve whatever goals that you all set together. And then after that, you're into maintenance, right? Great. If that's all you need to do, you want to just do it regularly and maintain. Or, as Andrew referred to a minute ago, you might start to push to develop mastery under complex circumstances. You might sort of start with practice that is just when you're brushing your teeth and get good at that before you move into, all right, when you start to notice those physiological triggers and you start to feel yourself sweating and your heart racing, can you bring in HRV at that point when it's more challenging? And that's kind of the overarching arc of where we're headed with this for everybody. Okay, and just nodding. I never know if you want to add. I pause, I look.
No,
Um,
I'm agreeing. I'm agreeing. There's so much to say. Like you can tell, we're pretty excited about this, and it's hard to just kind of stay on track. So, nope, don't
all
want to
right.
get you off track. You're great.
Super quick case study here just to show the impact that HRV can have. Andre is a third grade student who, good student, leader in his class, everybody likes him, but he's got ADHD as diagnosed from a QEEG, and that's a different webinar altogether. Um, and so at the end of the school day, he's having breakdowns that are massive, throwing things at the house, physically harming himself, saying really negative things. Bad news. And so his mother learned heart rate variability training from SADAR in that clinical setting, right? Came to understand what the impact of it could be, learned how to do it herself, and had it introduced to Andre in the clinical setting. And then they brought it home, right? So they got a home training system, and Andre began to do a little bit of HRV every day as part of his routines if he wanted to have access to screen time, right? And so it started out with that practice always being with the biofeedback screen so that he could learn how to do the skill very well. And then it became, all right, if you can tell me 3 times during the day, Andre, that you use your HRV training, that counts as your practice. Because really the goal is for him to begin to identify the times in school where he's actually a little upset, but he's not letting anybody know. And we want him to bring that down throughout the day. Um, and he got to a point where he was finding that so effective and enjoying it so much. He actually was teaching it to other kids when he saw them getting stressed out or angry at gym class if they missed, the goal shot. He was like, I pulled somebody aside and I taught them how to do the breathing. And so that speaks to the huge impact that he felt. Not to mention, of course, that the outbursts at home got much shorter and less intense. They didn't go away entirely. You know, that would be a big ask to happen as quickly as it might. Um, and then mom was able to actually coordinate with the school. Andre was lucky. Everybody was lucky. They had a teacher that was doing sort of these breathing breaks throughout the day. Um, but in conversation with mom and school, the teacher ended up getting a breath pacer that he kept in the back of the classroom. And he actually taught all the kids how to use it. And then Andre started coming home with stories about me and my friend sat at he doesn't call it the breath pacer, but I do. We were upset after recess because somebody called her a name and somebody did this to me. And she likes to breathe in on the orange and I like to breathe out on the orange. And so, this one's a nice case study because it shows the ways that HRV can fit into all of these spaces and also just shows the buy-in when people are engaged with it. Good, Ange?
Good. Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
Happy for Andre.
um, what's it take to make this happen in your space? The short answer is you can get started for $500 and 5 hours of your time, right? Equipment certainly can get more expensive than $200. If you get research grade equipment, that's obviously going to be more costly. But the equipment that we use most often in the clinic costs $400 when it's not on sale, and sometimes it's on sale.
And
Um,
I'll interrupt. There was a question about equipment, so this is a good time. What software do we recommend? And that's going to depend on what your use is. If you're a clinician and you're billing insurance, that's a whole different course. But if you're doing that, you need to use FDA cleared equipment. And that's easy enough to find out. You can always just put in the equipment name and be like, is it FDA cleared? Um, if you got to look at your budget, you got to look at who you're using it for. If you're using it for assessments, you're going to use different equipment. So not a total simple answer. And there's tons of equipment that's out there. So it's always good to talk with somebody about how they like their equipment. We have our go-tos, and we can talk about that later. Thanks.
Beautiful. Yeah, and then training. We're going to show you how to get into our course that's about to start. It's a quick start. You can do that for $300, or you can go totally, totally, totally to the extreme with a lot of deep, deep learning and get board certified. Obviously, that's going to be a little bit more money and a little bit more time. Um, so again, all depends on your goals, but $500 in 5 hours, and you could be doing this next week if you wanted to. All right, and so quick return on investment, super quick, because I do want to give you guys time for questions. Um, I think I can do all this, Ange, but cut me off if you feel like you can do better. Um, so, in a clinical office, you can be charging additional client fees, whether that's an out-of-pocket fee or billing for complexity code, which might add $5 to $15 more per session. That's the only part, Andrew, where you might want to correct me. Other than that, I'm going to feel super confident.
Yeah, good. No,
Good.
again, that's billing is complicated and detailed, but there are ways to do it.
Um, We referenced earlier that doing HRV is going to create uh, increased engagement. It's going to lead to faster progress because if someone is regulated, for instance, during talk therapy, they might be able to engage in more difficult conversations, right? If they're regulated during neurofeedback, that's also going to allow them to engage better. And we showed earlier that you're going to get better retention of your clients. They're going to be more likely to complete whatever treatment you're offering if you add HRV. And of course, it's a market differentiator. It's a funny time where AI is trying to replace talk therapy. AI can't replace regulating your nervous system and actually putting a sensor on somebody's finger or on their ear, right? So it's a differentiator about what you offer in your office as compared to other places. At school, really cool truth. This is true in an office also, but one device can really have an impact on many children, right? If you've got something as simple as a breath pacer, that can be a whole classroom watching the same breath pacer. If you've got HRV biofeedback equipment, you don't need to train a kid for the full day. They're not carrying it around with them, right? So anyone who comes through that pullouts classroom could be making use of that equipment over the course of the day. We know that there's a lot of grant opportunities for social emotional learning programs, and that really might be something that you are more likely to be eligible for if you're bringing in this research-based tool that's not super common and is incredibly effective. And then, of course, there's the clear benefit of all of the behavioral and academic improvements that follow heart rate variability training. Um, and then at home, if you just compare the startup cost for HRV training to anything else you've done with your kids in the past year, it's a high return on investment. I know I just paid for a soccer season that cost more than it would cost for me to get up and running with heart rate variability. And there's a value in reducing the stress in the house and giving your kids a lifelong skill. Good, on we go. This is me anticipating a couple of the possible but waits. So isn't this just breathing? No, it's not. We'll say over and over again. This is regulating your nervous system, right? So a lot of us are familiar with box breathing or different yoga breaths, and those all have a place, but this is different and more impactful than that. Again, the research speaks for itself. Contraindications: if somebody has a pacemaker, you need to be careful about trying to regulate their pace. Also, the pacemaker is doing a thing that might be difficult to override with your breath. Obviously, you always want to stay within your scope. So teachers, if we're doing heart rate variability training, we're teaching a skill that has broad impact. We're not treating ADHD or treating depression. Clinicians, if you're doing heart rate variability training, you're not treating cardiac problems, right? You're teaching someone a skill, you're teaching them self-regulation, but we all do need to stay clearly within our scope, and we should be looking to collaborate with other professionals as is appropriate, depending on what the presenting concerns are of whoever it is we're working with. Ange, do you want to say more on the staying within the scope?
Yeah, just if anybody, if we don't always assess for things if we're doing traditional talk therapy, but we do want to assess, just their general health. Have you been in the hospital? Have you been treated for anything? Are you in treatment? Have you ever had a cardiac event? Do you see a cardiologist? If they see a cardiologist, that trumps any of us unless we're a cardiologist. And then you work in conjunction with them and make sure that you have clearance to do anything related to that.
Wonderful. And do I need to be certified to do heart rate variability? No, no, you don't. But you can be if you want. It is an involved process to get certified. And in fact, you would have to do some heart rate variability training before certification in order to earn certification. Um, so it's very fair to bring this skill into your your work or your life at whatever point you're at now. Um, all right, this is just about going to wrap up our prepared portion of this, and we'll take questions in a moment. I've got 2 QR codes here that I will leave here for a moment, take away, and then put back. The top one is to the SADAR Knowledge Center. We've curated a bunch of resources that we think are really helpful. If you go here and type in HRV, you'll see a number of resources. About half of them are available with a free membership. The other half do require a premium membership. You can check things out over there. The bottom QR code is for a heart rate variability course that's going to teach the foundations and the essentials to begin practicing. It's a 4-hour course that also has 4 assessments on which we'll give you individualized feedback. It's fully self-paced with optional office hours once a quarter. So you can pop over to either of those. And before I totally open it up for questions, I just want to frame this. Our goal right now is to answer questions that are likely to have answers that are relevant to much of the audience. So if you've got questions that are super, super specific, just know in advance. We're going to point you either toward mentorship or towards a course that'll give specific information.
And there are a couple of questions already in the chat. So there were questions about software, and that is really going to depend upon your need. So I did put in the chat that we have 3 systems we use here. So you can just refer to the chat so that we can get other questions. And then there was a question about whether neurofeedback impacts heart rate variability. And to that, I'm going to tell you when I was first asked to teach a neurofeedback course, and that goes back like maybe 15 years ago, for another company, I had said to them, yeah, I would really like to teach the course, but I want to spend the first hour talking about heart rate variability. And they said, well, we don't sell equipment for heart rate variability. And I said, I know, but that's what I need to do. So we actually, in our office, we learned neurofeedback first and then learned heart rate variability. And now I would say if, somebody's going to learn one, that's, as Jenna said, a bigger bang for your buck for you and your clients. I wish they taught it in every first grade. So does neurofeedback impact? So the software, hard to say, depends on what you want to do, research, so on. But we're happy to talk about that. And I put in the chat what we use. If neurofeedback impacts heart rate variability, it does help you learn to relax. Neurofeedback is also self-regulation. Heart rate variability can be paired with neurofeedback very easily, and it can be paired with anything, really. And there is no negative to it. Again, if somebody has anxiety and you're getting them too relaxed, yes, that may be a negative, and that's where your clinical judgment comes in. So I think some of the other questions got answered in the chat.
And then if I also may
I didn't know you were here.
just to say, the neurofeedback, you can say is a top down approach to regulation. The HRV is a bottom up approach. So bringing the two together can be a particularly beneficial approach.
All right. I
Hey,
think we've addressed the questions in the chat. People can
There's
also
one more about parasympathetic what does it mean if parasympathetic activity is elevated and sympathetic activity is low? I mean, that's somebody who's not responding to the stressors, right? And we're supposed to be able to respond and then recalibrate. So we want to balance. So that question would imply an imbalance, and it's not a healthy thing. And there are many people who just don't even know what's going on in their bodies.
All right. Marina, I see your question about M waves specifically. That could be three things, right? So there's M Wave Pro, M Wave Plus, and there's like an M Wave self-contained something
Inner
device.
balance.
Thank you. I'm like, it's a um we address M Wave Pro and M Wave Plus in the course, and there are some examples of using it. If you're specifically interested in training on software, the equipment providers offer some training, and a mentorship hour would likely be the best way to do that. And Lavonda, you can just call me. That's going to be the easiest thing. The training, right? So the course is fully self-paced with optional live office hours. We also have in there a discussion board. So if you're not someone who's going to be able to make the scheduled office hours, but you've got questions, there's ways to post them. Our goal with the course was really to make it as accessible as possible for just about anyone to offer HRV biofeedback training. So that's what we've got. Anyone else? You're welcome to unmute. How long do you have access to the course? 6 months, which hopefully is more than enough to watch the 4 hours of lectures. Haha. Angelica, not me, sent you something.
I know. I'm looking at all the Jenna Pradas. Like, why would Jenna ask that question? We don't know what happened for those of you that came late, but a lot of us have the same names. Okay, so I do see something in there. Somebody's asking about registration. So we will take care of that. Gotcha, McGill. I didn't see you, but good to have you here, and we will get in touch with you.
And Nat, can you practice with an app without equipment? Yes and no, right? So there are excellent breath pacers that you can set at the range of breath rate that we know is associated with the resonance frequency for a large majority of the population. And you can breathe with those pacers, and there is certainly benefit to that. There is research for slow paced breathing as something that is good to do. What you don't get with that is the feedback on your biology specifically, right? And so you might be breathing slightly off your own resonance frequency and have no way to know that. Or you might be breathing kind of more shallow and not know that you're not having the impact on HRV that you're looking for. Ange dropped breathe to relax in there. Another breath pacer that I just learned about recently that I really like is Aloes is an app. That one you can actually adjust also the ratio of the in breath to the out breath. And they link up with music, which makes it pleasant for many. Um, is there HRV equipment to attach to the B-Medic? We addressed that one specifically. There is. It's a combi sensor. We talk about it briefly in the course. Yes.
Yeah, and I want to add, I was typing out about that. I want to add on that. There are some questions that I'm checking into with B-Medic about that combi sensor. So um, I don't feel, yes, there's equipment, but I want to ask them some questions about specifics in regards to that equipment.
All right.
Yeah,
Joy, if you've got the inner balance is excellent. My thought is take the course so that you know you're getting the most out of it, and so that you learn how to present the HRV to other folks. But inner balance is awesome. And it has a great place in homes. Also, possibly clinical, except it's hard to track multiple people on an inner balance, but it's excellent. All right, y'all.
Well, that was a crash course, guys. So there's lots more information. There's a ton of information on HeartMath, the HeartMath website. They are very good. They have a whole education section if you're an educator. They support their clinicians. But again, only because that's come up, and I'm trying to guide you to some free services. They're not going to be able to help you specifically from a clinician's point of view, but they will help you with their equipment. And any of the FDA cleared providers will do that as well. So, lots of stuff. Thank you for coming.
We'll send you an email by the end of today with a link to the recording and some other thoughts and ideas. Thanks, y'all, for coming. Great to see you.
Bye. Nice to see some of you.